The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store, and Helena Ashford pressed her gloved hand against her chest, feeling her heart pound with a rhythm that had nothing to do with the journey and everything to do with fear. She had come all this way to Fort Benton, Montana, in the spring of 1878, to marry a man she had never met, and now she carried a secret that could destroy everything before it even began. The driver opened the door, and Helena stepped down onto the dusty street, her dark blue traveling dress already covered in a fine layer of Montana grit. The town stretched before her, a collection of wooden buildings lining a wide main street, with the Missouri River glinting in the distance. Fort Benton was smaller than she had imagined, but it hummed with life. Freight wagons rolled past, their wheels creaking under heavy loads. Men in worn hats and dusty boots walked with purpose, and women in calico dresses moved between the shops with baskets on their arms. Helena's hands trembled as she smoothed her skirts. She had written to Harrison Wells 3 months ago, responding to his advertisement for a wife. His letters had been kind, thoughtful, describing his ranch outside of town and his dreams of building something lasting. He had been honest about the hard work, the isolation, the challenges of frontier life. She had been honest about everything except the one thing that mattered most. Miss Ashford. She turned to see a man approaching, and her breath caught. Harrison Wells was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard labor. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines at the corners of his blue eyes that suggested he smiled often. Dark brown hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and his jaw was strong and clean-shaven. He wore simple clothes, a work shirt and denim pants, boots that had seen many miles, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. "Mr. Wells," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He removed his hat, revealing more of that sun-bronzed face. "I hope the journey was not too difficult. Spring travel can be unpredictable." "It was long," she admitted, "but I am here now." Harrison studied her for a moment, and Helena felt heat rise to her cheeks. She knew what he saw. A woman of 22 with auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun, green eyes that probably looked too large in her pale face, and a figure that her traveling clothes did little to flatter. She was not beautiful, not in the classical sense, but her letters had been articulate and warm, and perhaps that had been enough. "You are more lovely than I imagined," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her heart ache with guilt. "Thank you," she managed. "You are very kind." He gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby. "I thought we might get your trunk loaded and head out to the ranch, unless you would prefer to stay in town tonight. There is a boarding house." Helena shook her head. "I have come this far. I would like to see my new home." Something flickered in his eyes, pleasure perhaps, and he nodded. "Then let us collect your things." The ride out to the ranch took nearly an hour, the wagon rolling along a rutted path that wound through rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers. The sky stretched overhead, impossibly blue and vast, and the air smelled of sage and earth. Harrison pointed out landmarks as they traveled, a distant line of cottonwoods that marked a creek, a rise where he had once spotted a herd of pronghorn, the fence line that marked the beginning of his property. "It is not much yet," he said as they crested a hill, and the ranch came into view. "But it is honest work, and the land is good." Helena looked down at the small valley below. A modest house stood near a bend in a creek, simple but well built, with a covered porch and glass windows that caught the afternoon sun. A barn and several outbuildings clustered nearby, and a corral held half a dozen horses. Beyond stretched pastureland where cattle grazed, their coats gleaming red and brown in the light. "It is beautiful," she said, and meant it. She had grown up in St. Louis, in a cramped apartment above her father's failed shop, surrounded by noise and crowds and the constant press of other people's lives. This open space, this quiet, called to something deep inside her. Harrison glanced at her, and she saw relief in his expression. "I am glad you think so. I have worked hard to build this place." They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the house, a dog came bounding out, barking enthusiastically. Harrison laughed, a warm sound that transformed his serious face. "That is Duke. He is more welcoming committee than guard dog, I am afraid." Helena climbed down from the wagon, and Duke immediately pressed against her legs, tail wagging furiously. She bent to scratch behind his ears, and the simple pleasure of the animal's warmth made her smile despite her anxiety. Harrison carried her trunk inside, and Helena followed, her heart pounding again. The interior was clean and spare, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a stone fireplace taking up one wall. Simple furniture filled the space, a table and chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, shelves lined with books. 2 doors led off the main room, bedrooms she assumed. "I know it is not fancy," Harrison said, setting her trunk down carefully, "but it is solid and warm in winter." "It is perfect," Helena said softly. She turned to face him, knowing she could not delay any longer. Her conscience screamed at her, and the weight of her secret felt like stones pressing on her chest. "Mr. Wells, I need to speak with you about something important." He looked at her with those clear blue eyes, patient and attentive. "Of course. Please call me Harrison. We are to be married after all." The words cut through her. "That is what I need to discuss. Harrison, there is something I did not tell you in my letters. Something you deserve to know before we proceed with any wedding." His expression grew serious and he gestured to the table. "Sit down, please. Whatever it is, we can talk about it." Helena sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. Harrison sat across from her, his large hands folded on the worn wood of the table. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I have been ill," she began, her voice shaking. "For the past year. At first it was just fatigue, weakness. I thought I was simply working too hard at the dress shop where I was employed. But it grew worse. Some days I could barely rise from bed. I have pains in my joints, fevers that come and go without reason. The doctor in St. Louis examined me several times." Harrison's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, letting her continue. "He believes it is rheumatic fever, though he cannot be certain. He said the damage to my heart may be permanent. I might improve or I might not. I might live many years or—" She could not finish the sentence. Tears stung her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. "I am sorry. I should have told you in my letters. I know this changes everything. I understand if you want me to return to St. Louis. I will not hold you to any promise." The silence stretched between them, heavy and terrible. Helena forced herself to look up to meet his gaze. She expected anger, disappointment, perhaps disgust at her deception. Instead, she saw something she could not quite name, a softness around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders as though he were restraining himself from reaching across the table. "Why did you come?" he asked finally. "If you knew you were ill, why respond to my advertisement at all?" Helena's breath hitched. "Because I was alone. My father died 2 years ago and I have no other family. I was working 12 hours a day at the dress shop, barely earning enough to pay for my room. When I became ill, I lost my position. I was facing the poorhouse or worse. When I saw your advertisement, I thought perhaps I could have a few months, maybe a year, of something different, something better. I know it was selfish. I know it was wrong to deceive you." Harrison stood abruptly and Helena flinched, certain he was about to order her out. Instead, he walked to the window, staring out at the land he had worked so hard to claim. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Do you remember the wedding vows, Helena? The traditional ones, she frowned, confused by the question. Yes, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer. In sickness and in health, he finished, turning to face her. Until death do us part, those are not just pretty words to me. They are a promise, a commitment. I did not advertise for a wife because I wanted someone to cook and clean. I wanted a partner, someone to share this life with in good times and bad. But you did not know, Helena whispered. You thought you were getting a healthy woman who could work beside you. I was getting you, Harrison said firmly. He crossed back to the table and, to her shock, knelt beside her chair so their eyes were level. I read your letters, Helena. Every word multiple times. I saw your intelligence, your humor, your kindness. I saw how you wrote about books and ideas, about wanting to see the stars without buildings blocking the sky. I saw a woman I thought I could build a life with. That has not changed. How can you say that? She demanded, her voice breaking. I might be a burden to you. I might not be able to do the work required. I might die and leave you alone again. His hand reached out, hesitating just inches from hers on the armrest. May I? She nodded, unable to speak, and his calloused fingers gently covered hers. The touch sent warmth flooding through her, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. We all die, Helena. That is the one certainty in this life. I could be thrown from a horse tomorrow. I could catch pneumonia next winter. A rattlesnake could bite me while I am mending fence. We do not get guarantees. What we get is today, this moment, and the choice of how we face whatever comes. You are too good, she sobbed. Too kind. No, he said softly. I am just a man who has been alone for too long, who sees a chance at happiness and does not want to let it slip away. If you are willing, if you truly want to stay, then I would be honored to marry you. And whatever your illness brings, we will face it together. In sickness and in health starts right now, Helena. Right this moment. What do you say? She looked into his eyes and saw no pity there, only honest affection and determination. Something inside her chest, something that had been clenched tight with fear and shame, began to loosen. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I want to stay, I want to try. Harrison's face broke into a smile that transformed him, making him look younger, almost boyish despite his 30 years. Then we will make it work. I promise you that. He stood, gently pulling her to her feet, and for a moment they simply stood there, hands clasped, looking at each other in the golden afternoon light filtering through the window. Then Harrison cleared his throat, some of the intensity fading into practical concern. You must be exhausted from your journey. Let me show you to your room. You can rest, and I will prepare supper. Tomorrow we can go into town and speak with Reverend Matthews about the wedding if you are feeling well enough. I am well enough, Helena said quickly. The fatigue was there, as it always was, a bone-deep weariness that never quite left her, but adrenaline and hope were carrying her forward. I do not want to wait. I do not want you to have time to reconsider. I will not reconsider, Harrison said firmly, but I do want you to rest. Come. He showed her to the smaller of the two bedrooms, a simple space with a bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser, and a small table with a wash basin. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed where Harrison had placed it earlier. This was my sister's room when she visited, he explained. She married a rancher down in Wyoming Territory 2 years ago. I do not see her often, but we write. After we are married, this can be a guest room or whatever you wish. Helena looked at him sharply. After we are married, I will move into your room. Color rose in Harrison's cheeks, a blush visible even beneath his tan. Only if you wish it. I know this is all happening quickly. I will not rush you into anything you are not ready for. The kindness in his words made Helena's heart ache. She had expected to fulfill the duties of a wife without complaint. It was, after all, part of the arrangement she had agreed to when she responded to his advertisement. But Harrison was offering her choice, respect, and something that felt dangerously close to genuine care. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." He nodded, that gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Rest now. I will call you when supper is ready." Alone in the room, Helena sank onto the bed, her whole body trembling. She had done it. She had confessed her secret, and instead of rejection, she had found acceptance beyond anything she had dared hope for. Harrison Wells was either the best man she had ever met or a fool, and she suspected it was the former. She removed her traveling jacket and loosened her hair from its pins, running her fingers through the auburn waves. Her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser showed a woman with tired eyes and too pale skin, but there was also a flush of color in her cheeks that had not been there in months, a spark of something that might have been hope. A soft knock came at the door perhaps an hour later, and Harrison's voice called, "Supper is ready, if you would like to join me." Helena smoothed her hair and emerged to find the table set with simple fare: fried ham, beans, and fresh bread that Harrison admitted came from a neighbor woman who kept him supplied. They ate in companionable near silence, the awkwardness of strangers trying to find their footing with each other. "Tell me about the ranch," Helena said finally, wanting to break the quiet. "How long have you been here?" Harrison's face lit up as he talked. He had come to Montana Territory 5 years ago, drawn by the promise of land and the chance to build something of his own. He had worked as a ranch hand for 2 years, learning the country and saving every penny before filing his claim on this valley. The first winter he had lived in a dugout shelter, half buried in the hillside, while he built the house. He had started with 20 head of cattle and now had nearly 200 along with the horses. "It has been hard work," he said, "and lonely. I have good neighbors, folks who help when help is needed, but at the end of the day there was no one to share it all with, no one to talk to except Duke." The dog, hearing his name, thumped his tail from his spot near the fireplace. "I understand loneliness," Helena said quietly. "After my father died, I felt as though I were walking through the world as a ghost, present but not really seen, not really part of anything." Harrison nodded slowly. "That is exactly it. I am hoping we can be less lonely together." "I think we can," Helena agreed, and the smile he gave her made warmth bloom in her chest. They talked late into the evening, the conversation flowing more easily as the hours passed. Harrison wanted to know about St. Louis, about her childhood, her father's shop that had sold books and paper goods. Helena found herself laughing as she described some of the eccentric customers, the woman who insisted on smelling every sheet of writing paper before purchasing, the old man who came in every Tuesday to argue about philosophy with her father. "He sounds like a good man, your father," Harrison said. "He was," Helena replied, her voice catching. "He loved ideas more than business, which is why we were always poor. But he made sure I learned to read and write well, and he never treated me as though my opinions mattered less because I was female." "Then I am grateful to him," Harrison said, "for raising such a remarkable daughter." Helena felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different from the earlier tears of fear and shame. These were tears of gratitude, of relief, of tentative joy. When exhaustion finally overtook her, Harrison walked her to her bedroom door. He hesitated, then gently took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a chaste kiss to her knuckles. "Sleep well, Helena. Tomorrow we will start planning our future." She lay awake for a long time after closing the door, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the creak of the house settling, the distant call of a night bird, the rustle of Duke moving in the main room. Her body ached with fatigue, but her mind raced with thoughts of Harrison's kindness, his steady presence, the way he had looked at her when he knelt beside her chair and promised to face whatever came together. She had not expected to feel hopeful. She had not expected to feel anything except relief at escaping destitution. But lying there in the darkness, in this small room in a house on the Montana frontier, Helena felt the first stirrings of something that might, in time, become love. Morning came with golden light streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting from the main room. Helena rose slowly, testing her body's response. The fatigue was there, as always, a heaviness in her limbs and a slight ache in her joints. But it was not worse than usual, and she dressed carefully in a simple day dress of gray cotton before emerging from her room. Harrison stood at the stove, and he turned when he heard her, his face breaking into a smile. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," she admitted. "Something about the quiet here." "It takes some getting used to," he agreed, "but I have come to love it. Coffee." They breakfasted on eggs from his chickens and more of the neighbor's bread. And then Harrison hitched up the wagon again for the trip into town. The morning was clear and warming quickly. The sky that endless Montana blue, and Helena found herself genuinely smiling as they rolled along the rutted track. Fort Benton was busier than the previous day, with freight wagons loading and unloading at the river levee. Harrison explained that the town was one of the most important ports on the Missouri River, the farthest point that steamboats could reliably reach, and goods came through here bound for mining camps and ranches all over Montana territory. They made their way to a small white church at the edge of town, and Harrison helped Helena down from the wagon with a gentleness that made her heart flutter. Reverend Matthews was a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and a shock of white hair. He welcomed them warmly into his study. "Harrison Wells," he said, shaking the cowboy's hand. "It has been a few weeks since I have seen you in services." "I have been busy with spring work," Harrison admitted, "but I have good reason to come today. Reverend, this is Miss Helena Ashford. She has come from St. Louis to be my wife, and we would like to arrange a wedding as soon as possible." The Reverend turned his kind gaze on Helena, and she felt herself being gently assessed. "Miss Ashford, welcome to Fort Benton. This is quite a journey you have made. Are you certain you wish to proceed so quickly? Perhaps you would like time to know Mr. Wells better." Helena glanced at Harrison, who nodded encouragingly. "Reverend Matthews," she said carefully, "I am certain. Harrison and I have corresponded for months, and we have been honest with each other about our expectations. I came here with the intention of becoming his wife, and I see no reason to delay." The Reverend stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Very well. I can perform the ceremony this Saturday, if that suits you both. That gives you 4 days to prepare and to be certain of your decision." "That would be perfect," Harrison said. "Thank you, Reverend." As they left the church, Helena felt almost dizzy with the reality of it all. 4 days. In 4 days she would be married to this man she barely knew but who had already shown her more kindness than she had any right to expect. Harrison seemed to sense her turbulence. "Are you well? Do you need to rest?" "I am well," she assured him, "just a bit overwhelmed." "We have time before we need to head back to the ranch," he said. "Would you like to see the town? We could stop at the general store, get any supplies you might need." They spent the next hour exploring Fort Benton's Main Street. The general store was a revelation, packed with everything from farming equipment to bolts of cloth to candy in glass jars. The proprietor, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Carson, greeted Harrison warmly and examined Helena with frank curiosity. "So you are the mail-order bride we heard about," she said, not unkindly. "Welcome, dear. We need more women in this territory, and Harrison Wells is a good man. You have chosen well." "Thank you," Helena said, unsure how to respond to such directness. Mrs. Carson helped her select a few necessities: hairpins, a new cake of soap, thread, and needles. Harrison insisted on buying a bolt of pale blue fabric, saying it would look lovely with her coloring and she might want a new dress for the wedding. Helena protested the expense, but he was firm. "Let me do this," he said quietly. "Please." They stopped at a small restaurant for lunch, and Helena was introduced to what seemed like half the town as people came over to greet Harrison and meet his intended. Everyone was friendly, though she caught speculative looks and whispers. She knew what they were thinking. Why would a woman from a city like St. Louis come all this way to marry a simple rancher? But no one was rude, and several women made a point of welcoming her and offering to call at the ranch once she was settled. By the time they headed back in the afternoon, Helena was exhausted but strangely happy. Harrison seemed to sense her fatigue and kept the conversation light during the ride, pointing out wildlife and telling amusing stories about his early days learning to be a cattleman. The next few days fell into a gentle rhythm. Helena rested when she needed to, but she also insisted on helping around the house. She cooked meals, mended Harrison's worn shirts, swept and tidied. Harrison tried to stop her from overexerting herself, but she was stubborn. "I need to feel useful," she told him firmly. "I am not an invalid and I will not be treated as one." "I know," he said, "but I worry." "You have known me for 3 days," she pointed out, but her tone was gentle. "You do not need to worry so much." "I cannot help it," he admitted, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. They were falling into an easy companionship, a comfort with each other that surprised them both. Harrison showed her around the ranch, introducing her to each horse by name, explaining his plans for expanding the herd and improving the grazing land. Helena shared her love of reading and was delighted to discover that Harrison's modest bookshelf held several volumes she had not read. They sat together in the evenings, Harrison mending tack or carving a new handle for a tool while Helena read aloud. Her voice filled the small house, bringing stories of adventure and romance to life, and Duke dozed contentedly at their feet. On Thursday evening, 2 days before the wedding, a neighbor couple came to call. Thomas and Martha Brennan ran a ranch about 5 miles to the east, and they brought a basket of fresh vegetables and a cake as a welcome gift. "We wanted to meet the woman who finally caught Harrison's eye," Martha said with a warm smile. She was in her 40s, sturdy and practical, with laugh lines around her eyes, and to offer our congratulations. They sat around the table drinking coffee, and Helena found herself genuinely liking the Brennans. Thomas and Harrison talked cattle and grass conditions, while Martha asked Helena about her journey west and her first impressions of Montana. "It is different from anything I have known," Helena admitted, "but beautiful in its own way. I think I will be happy here." Martha reached over and patted her hand. "It is hard country but good, and Harrison is one of the finest men in the territory. You are fortunate to have found each other." After the Brennans left, Harrison walked Helena to her bedroom door as had become their custom. But tonight he paused, his hand resting on the doorframe, his face serious in the lamplight. "Helena, I want you to know that I understand this is a business arrangement in its way. You needed security and I needed a wife, but I hope in time it might become more than that. I hope we might truly be partners in every sense." Helena's heart pounded. "I hope that too," she whispered. "You have already given me so much more than I expected. Kindness and respect and the feeling of being valued. I have not felt that way in a very long time." He smiled then, that warm expression that made him handsome despite his weathered features. "You are easy to value, Helena. Sleep well. Tomorrow Martha is coming over to help you with your dress, and I will be scarce so you women can have your preparations." Friday passed in a flurry of activity. True to his word, Harrison made himself absent, riding out to check on his cattle and mend some fence. Martha arrived mid-morning with another neighbor woman, Elizabeth Porter, who was younger, perhaps 25, with a friendly smile and clever fingers. "I worked as a seamstress before I married," Elizabeth explained as she examined the blue fabric Harrison had bought. "Let us see what we can make for you." The women worked through the day, cutting and stitching the fabric into a simple but elegant dress with a fitted bodice and full skirt. Helena felt guilty sitting while they worked, but Martha was firm. "You need to save your strength for tomorrow," she said. "And besides, it is nice to have woman talk. Lord knows we do not get enough of it out here." They chattered and laughed, sharing stories and gossip, and Helena felt herself relaxing in their company. She had not had female friends in years, not since her father's business failed and they had moved to the poor part of St. Louis. It felt good to be included, to be welcomed. When Harrison returned in the late afternoon, dusty and tired, the women shooed him away before he could see the finished dress. "Bad luck," Martha declared. "You will see it tomorrow when your bride walks down the aisle." His eyes sought Helena across the room, and the warmth in his gaze made her cheeks heat. "I am sure she will be beautiful." That night, their last before the wedding, they sat together on the porch as the sun set, painting the western sky in shades of gold and rose and purple. Duke lay at their feet, and the evening air was soft and fragrant with sage. "Are you nervous?" Harrison asked quietly. "Terrified," Helena admitted. "But in a good way, I think. This time yesterday, I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, either in poverty or as a burden to strangers. Now I am about to marry a good man and start a new life. It feels like a dream." "Not a dream," Harrison said. He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "This is real, Helena. Tomorrow we will stand before God and our neighbors and make promises to each other, and I mean to keep every promise I make to you." She turned to look at him, this man who had so quickly become essential to her fragile hope. "I will keep my promises too, in sickness and in health, Harrison." "I meant it when I accepted those words." "I know," he said softly. "I believe you." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, scattered across the darkening sky like diamonds on velvet. Helena thought about the past week, about how much had changed, how much she had gained. She thought about the illness that still lurked in her body, the weakness and fatigue that might claim her at any time. But for the first time in months, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt hope. Saturday morning dawned clear and beautiful, and Helena woke with butterflies dancing in her stomach. She dressed carefully in the new blue gown, and Martha and Elizabeth arrived early to help with her hair, pinning it up in soft waves with a few loose curls framing her face. "You look lovely," Martha said warmly, and Elizabeth nodded agreement. "Harrison will be speechless," Elizabeth added with a grin. The ceremony was set for noon, and they arrived at the church to find a surprising number of townspeople gathered. Helena had not expected anyone beyond the Brennans and a few of Harrison's closest neighbors, but it seemed the whole community had turned out to witness the wedding. Reverend Matthews met them at the door, and Helena could hear the low murmur of conversation from inside the church. Her hands were shaking, and Martha squeezed her arm reassuringly. "It will be fine, dear. Just breathe." Then the doors opened, and Helena saw Harrison standing at the front of the church, and her breath caught for an entirely different reason. He wore a new suit, clearly purchased for the occasion, dark and well-fitted, and his hair was neatly combed. But it was the expression on his face as he saw her that made her knees weak, a look of wonder and pleasure and something deeper, something that made her heart race. She walked down the aisle, aware of the watching faces but focused entirely on Harrison. When she reached his side, he took her hand, and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers that told her he was as nervous as she was. Reverend Matthews began the ceremony, his voice carrying through the small church. Helena barely heard the words, lost in the reality of the moment. When it came time for the vows, Harrison turned to face her fully, his blue eyes locked on hers. I, Harrison Wells, take you, Helena Ashford, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you. I promise to stand by you in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, in good times and in bad, for as long as we both shall live. His voice was steady and clear, and the words struck Helena with the force of a vow truly meant. She blinked back tears as she repeated her own promises, her voice shaking but strong. I, Helena Ashford, take you, Harrison Wells, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you. I promise to stand by you in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, in good times and in bad, for as long as we both shall live. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, Reverend Matthews said, smiling, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Harrison, you may kiss your bride. Harrison's hands came up to frame her face, gentle and careful, and he leaned down to press his lips to hers. The kiss was chaste, appropriate for the public setting, but it sent warmth flooding through Helena's entire body. When he pulled back, his smile was radiant. Hello, wife, he murmured, just for her. Hello, husband, she whispered back, and suddenly she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. The congregation erupted in applause and congratulations, and the next hour passed in a blur of handshakes and well wishes. Mrs. Carson from the general store had organized a small reception in the church hall with cake and lemonade, and people pressed small gifts into their hands. A hand-carved wooden spoon, a jar of preserves, a set of embroidered dish towels. Folks here take care of their own, Thomas Brennan said, clapping Harrison on the shoulder. And you are one of ours now, Mrs. Wells. Mrs. Wells. The name sent a thrill through Helena. She was Mrs. Harrison Wells, a married woman with a home and a husband and, perhaps most importantly, a future. Late in the afternoon, they drove back to the ranch, the wagon loaded with gifts and the leftover cake. Harrison helped Helena down, and for a moment they stood in the yard, looking at the house that was now their shared home. Are you happy? Harrison asked quietly. Helena turned to him, this man who had become her husband, and felt the truth of her answer in every fiber of her being. I am. More than I thought possible. He smiled and offered his arm. Then let us go inside, Mrs. Wells, and start our life together. The first weeks of marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Helena learned the rhythm of ranch life. Early mornings with the sunrise, days filled with endless tasks, evenings that came with the satisfaction of work completed. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to make do with simple ingredients, to preserve and plan for the harsh Montana winters Harrison described. She also learned her own limitations. There were days when the fatigue was overwhelming, when even simple tasks left her breathless and shaking. On those days, Harrison would gently but firmly insist she rest, taking over whatever she had been attempting. At first, she fought him, hating the feeling of uselessness. But gradually she came to accept that he did not see her as a burden. You do more on your bad days than some women do on their best days, he told her one afternoon when she had broken down in frustrated tears after being unable to finish hanging the laundry. And you are healing, Helena. Your body needs time. What if I do not heal? She asked, voicing the fear that haunted her. What if I just get worse? Harrison pulled her close, tucking her head beneath his chin. "Then we will deal with that when it comes. But you do not seem worse to me. You seem stronger than when you arrived." She realized with surprise that he was right. The fatigue was still present, but the fevers had not returned, and some days she felt almost normal. The fresh air, the good food, and perhaps simply the absence of constant worry were working their own kind of medicine. Their relationship deepened in those quiet weeks. They talked endlessly, sharing their histories, their dreams, their thoughts on everything from politics to poetry. Harrison had a sharp mind beneath his simple manner, and he loved to debate ideas, always respectful of her opinions even when he disagreed. They also grew physically closer, though with a gentleness that surprised Helena. Their first night as a married couple, Harrison had simply held her, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances until she fell asleep. Over the following days and weeks, their touches became more familiar, more intimate, until one night the barriers between them fell away entirely, and they came together as husband and wife in truth. It was tender and careful, with Harrison always mindful of her health, her comfort. And afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Helena felt something shift in her heart. What had begun as gratitude and respect was transforming into something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to love. Summer arrived in full force, bringing long, hot days and the hard work of haying. Harrison hired 2 ranch hands to help, young men from town who were respectful and hardworking. Helena fed them lunch each day and provided cool water, feeling useful even when she could not work in the fields herself. She also began to explore her new home beyond the ranch yard. On good days, she would walk along the creek, reveling in the wildflowers and the birdsong, the peace of being truly alone with nature. She started a small garden near the house, vegetables and herbs that would supplement their stores. Harrison built her raised beds so she would not have to bend so far, and helped her haul water when the irrigation proved too much for her limited strength. One evening in late June, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and Helena realized she was truly content. Her illness had not disappeared, but it had become something she lived with rather than something that defined her. She had found a place, a purpose, and most importantly, she had found Harrison. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her watching him instead of the colorful sky. "That I am grateful," she said simply, "for all of this, for you." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I am the grateful one. You have brought life to this place, Helena. Before you came, it was just a house and land. Now it is a home." "It is our home," she said softly. "Together." As midsummer approached, Helena noticed a change in her body that at first she attributed to the lingering effects of her illness. She was more tired than usual, queasy in the mornings, her breasts tender. When she missed her monthly courses, she tried to tell herself it was the stress of her new life, the changes in her routine. But when a second month passed with no sign, she could no longer deny the possibility. She said nothing to Harrison, terrified of raising hopes that might be dashed, terrified too of what a pregnancy might mean for her weakened body. Finally, she confided in Martha Brennan during one of the older woman's visits. Martha examined her with experienced hands and a knowing eye, then sat back with a smile. "You are with child, my dear. I would say about 10 weeks along if I had to guess." Helena's hands flew to her stomach, flat still beneath her dress. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor's examination, and the nearest doctor is in Helena, 2 days' ride from here. But yes, I am quite certain." "Have you told Harrison?" "Not yet." "Martha, I am scared. What if my illness affects the baby? What if the pregnancy makes my heart condition worse?" Martha's expression grew serious. Those are legitimate concerns, Helena. I will not lie to you. Pregnancy is hard on any woman's body, and with your health challenges, it could be difficult. But I have seen women with all manner of ailments bear healthy children. You are young and stronger than you think. You must tell Harrison, though. He has a right to know, and you will need his support. That evening, after supper, Helena asked Harrison to sit with her on the porch. Her hands were shaking, and she twisted them in her lap as she tried to find the words. "What is it?" Harrison asked, immediately concerned. "Are you feeling worse? Should I ride for the doctor?" "No," she said quickly. "I am not ill, at least not in the way you mean." She took a deep breath. "Harrison, I believe I am with child." The expression that crossed his face was pure wonder. "Truly, you are certain?" "Martha examined me today. She believes I am about 10 weeks along." Harrison's whoop of joy startled Duke, who had been dozing nearby. He pulled Helena into his arms, holding her close, and she felt the tremor of emotion running through his large frame. "A baby," he said, his voice rough. "Helena, this is wonderful news." She pulled back to look at him. "You are not worried about my health, about the risks?" His joy dimmed slightly, replaced by sober concern. "Of course I am worried, but I am also hopeful. You have been stronger these past months, and we will be careful. We will get you to a doctor in Helena as soon as it can be arranged. Whatever you need, whatever will keep you and the baby safe, we will do it." Tears spilled down Helena's cheeks, relief and fear and joy all tangled together. "I want this baby so much. I want to give you a child, but I am afraid." "Fear is natural," Harrison said gently, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "But we will face this together just as we have faced everything else. You are not alone, Helena. Never again." The next week, Harrison arranged for Thomas Brennan to watch the ranch while he and Helena made the 2-day journey to Helena, the territorial capital. They traveled slowly, Harrison mindful of every bump in the road, stopping frequently to let Helena rest. Helena was a bustling town, much larger than Fort Benton, with brick buildings and boardwalks and the general chaos of a mining boom town. Harrison found a decent hotel and settled Helena in their room before going to inquire after a doctor. Dr. Samuel Harding was in his 60s, with a white beard and gentle manner. He examined Helena thoroughly, asking detailed questions about her medical history and her current symptoms. When he finished, he had them both sit down in his office. "Mrs. Wells, your heart does show some irregularity, which is consistent with the rheumatic fever diagnosis. However, you seem to be in better health than I would have expected given your history. The pregnancy will put additional strain on your heart. There is no denying that. But I do not see any reason why, with proper care, you cannot carry this child to term and deliver safely." Helena sagged with relief, and Harrison squeezed her hand. "What kind of care?" Harrison asked. "What do we need to do?" Dr. Harding outlined a series of recommendations. Plenty of rest, no heavy lifting or strenuous work, a diet rich in iron and protein, and regular check-ins to monitor her condition. He also prescribed a tonic to support her heart function and gave Harrison a list of warning signs that would require immediate medical attention. "The biggest risk will be during the delivery itself," the doctor said honestly. "The strain on your heart will be significant. I would strongly recommend that you plan to stay in Helena or Fort Benton for the final month of your pregnancy, somewhere with access to medical care. Do you have family or friends who could take you in?" "Martha Brennan," Helena said immediately. "She lives near us and has experience with birthing. She would help, I am sure of it." "Good," Dr. Harding nodded. "Then my advice is to take things easy, enjoy your pregnancy, and plan to be somewhere with help when your time comes. You are young and determined, Mrs. Wells." Those are advantages not to be underestimated. They stayed in Helena one more day, purchasing supplies and the medicines Dr. Harding had recommended before starting the journey home. Helena was exhausted by the travel but also profoundly relieved. She could carry this baby. She could give Harrison the family he deserved. The remainder of the summer passed in a golden haze. Harrison was ridiculously protective, barely letting Helena lift anything heavier than a teacup. She chafed under the restrictions sometimes, but mostly she was amused by his devotion. He would sit with his hand on her still, flat belly, talking to the baby about the ranch, the horses, the big sky over Montana. "You are going to love it here," he would murmur. "Wide open spaces to run and play, a creek to fish in, the best mother a child could ask for." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Helena said one evening, watching him with soft eyes. "I hope so," he replied. "I want to give our child everything. Love, security, a home that is always safe and welcoming." As autumn arrived, painting the cottonwoods along the creek in shades of gold, Helena's pregnancy became visible. Her dresses had to be let out, and Martha brought over some of her own maternity clothes from years past. Helena bloomed, her cheeks flushed with color, her eyes bright. The fatigue was still present, but it was hard to separate the exhaustion of her illness from the normal tiredness of pregnancy. Harrison brought in extra help for the fall roundup and the preparation for winter, refusing to let Helena do any of the heavy preserving and storing work. She directed operations from the kitchen table, telling the ranch hands where to stack firewood and how to organize the root cellar, but Harrison did most of the actual labor himself. "You are going to exhaust yourself," she protested one evening as he came in, dusty and tired from a long day of butchering and smoking meat. "I am strong," he said simply. "And you are carrying our child. It is worth any amount of work to keep you both safe." Winter came early that year, a hard freeze in late October followed by the first significant snowfall in early November. Harrison made sure the house was sealed tight against the cold, and he kept the woodbox full and the fire burning. On days when the wind howled and snow piled against the windows, they stayed inside, cozy and content. Helena was in her 6th month now, her belly round and firm. The baby moved frequently, strong kicks and rolls that delighted Harrison. He would put his ear against her stomach, claiming he could hear the baby's heartbeat, and Helena would laugh and run her fingers through his hair. "I love you," she said one snowy afternoon, the words slipping out naturally. It was the first time she had said them aloud, though she had been feeling them for months. Harrison looked up at her, his blue eyes wide with wonder. "I love you too, Helena. I have loved you since the day you confessed your illness and still agreed to stay. You are the bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known." He kissed her then, deep and sweet, and Helena felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. This life, this man, this child growing inside her, it was all so much more than she had dared to dream. As winter deepened and January arrived, they began to make plans for the birth. Martha and Thomas insisted that Helena come to stay with them for the final month of her pregnancy. Their house was larger, and Martha had assisted at dozens of births over the years. Harrison was reluctant to be separated from Helena, but he recognized the wisdom of the plan. "I will visit every day," he promised. "And the moment labor starts, someone will fetch me. I want to be there, Helena. I want to be with you." In mid-February of 1879, when Helena was 8 months along, they made the move to the Brennan Ranch. Harrison carried her into the house as though she were made of glass, and Martha had already prepared a comfortable room for them. The days passed slowly, Helena heavy and uncomfortable, anxious for the baby to come. Harrison visited as promised, staying as long as he could before riding back to check on his own place. The separation was hard on both of them, but they endured it, knowing it was for the best. On a cold night in early March, Helena woke with a sharp pain low in her back. She lay still for a moment, waiting, and then another pain came, stronger this time. She knew immediately what it meant. "Martha," she called, her voice cutting through the quiet house. "Martha, it is time." Martha appeared within minutes, calm and competent. She examined Helena and nodded. "Early labor. We have time, but Thomas needs to ride for Harrison now." The next hours were a blur of pain and fear and determination. Helena had never experienced anything like it. The waves of contractions that gripped her body, the primal force of bringing new life into the world. Martha stayed with her constantly, coaching her through each contraction, offering water and encouragement. Harrison arrived as dawn was breaking, his face pale with worry. He burst into the room and went straight to Helena's side, taking her hand. "I am here," he said urgently. "I am right here, my love. Stay with me," Helena gasped as another contraction took hold. "Please do not leave." "Never," he vowed. As the morning wore on, the labor intensified. Helena was exhausted, her heart racing in a way that frightened her. She could see the concern in Martha's eyes, feel the tension in Harrison's grip on her hand. "I cannot," she sobbed at one point, overwhelmed by pain and fear. "I cannot do this." "Yes, you can," Harrison said fiercely, his face close to hers. "You are the strongest person I know, Helena. You can do this. I believe in you. In sickness and in health," Martha added, her voice firm. "You have faced down illness, traveled across the country, built a new life. You can birth this baby, Helena. Now push." Helena bore down with everything she had, drawing on reserves of strength she did not know she possessed. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, consuming and terrible, but beneath it was determination. She would meet her child. She would survive this. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she heard Martha's cry of triumph. "The head is out. One more push, Helena, just one more." Helena gathered herself and pushed with every ounce of strength remaining in her body. She felt the baby slip free, heard a moment of terrible silence, and then the most beautiful sound in the world, her child's first cry. "It is a boy," Martha announced, her voice thick with emotion. "A healthy, strong boy." She placed the squirming, wailing infant on Helena's chest, and Helena looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy. He was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Hello, my son." Harrison was crying too, unashamed tears streaming down his weathered face. He reached out to touch the baby with one tentative finger, and the tiny hand immediately grasped it. "He is perfect," Harrison said in wonder. "Helena, you did it. You brought our son into the world." Martha worked efficiently, delivering the afterbirth and checking Helena for any complications. "You did beautifully," she told Helena. "Your heart held strong. You rest now while I clean up the baby." Helena drifted in and out of consciousness as Martha and Harrison cared for her and the baby. She was aware of being washed and dressed in a clean nightgown, of being given water and broth to sip. And then the baby was in her arms again, swaddled in soft flannel, his eyes scrunched shut, and his tiny mouth working as he rooted for food. With Martha's help, she managed to get the baby to latch, and the feeling of him nursing sent a wave of love so powerful through her that she gasped. This tiny person, this miracle, was hers and Harrison's. They had created him together, and she would do anything to protect him, to give him the best life possible. Harrison sat beside the bed, watching his wife and son with an expression of such complete love that Martha smiled and quietly left the room to give them privacy. "What shall we name him?" Helena asked softly. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Harrison thought for a moment, his fingers still clasped in his son's tiny hand. "Henry," he said. "Henry Wells, after my father. He was a good man, and I would like our son to carry his name." "Henry Wells," Helena repeated, trying it out. "I like it. Henry, welcome to the world." The baby, as if in acknowledgement, made a small snuffling sound and continued nursing. Helena laughed, the sound bubbling up from deep inside her chest, pure joy mixed with exhaustion. They stayed at the Brennan Ranch for 2 weeks, giving Helena time to recover and to establish nursing. Martha was invaluable, teaching Helena how to care for an infant, how to swaddle and soothe and recognize the different cries. Harrison was a devoted father from the first moment, content to hold Henry for hours, singing to him in a surprisingly pleasant voice, walking him when he fussed. When they finally returned to their own ranch, it was with a sense of coming home. Harrison carried Henry in one arm and helped Helena down from the wagon with the other, and Duke danced around them, tail wagging, as though welcoming the new addition. The house felt different now, filled with the sounds of a baby, crying and cooing, the rustle of swaddling clothes, Helena's soft singing as she rocked Henry to sleep. Harrison had built a cradle during the long winter nights, and it sat beside their bed, within easy reach for nighttime feedings. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing green grass and wildflowers and new calves in the pasture. Helena slowly regained her strength, though she was careful not to overdo it. The fatigue that had haunted her for so long seemed to have eased, and Dr. Harding, when he visited in May to check on mother and baby, pronounced them both healthy. "Whatever you are doing, Mrs. Wells, keep it up," he said with a smile. "Your heart sounds better than it did last year. And young Henry is thriving." As Henry grew, he became the center of their world. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, fascinated by everything around him. Harrison would take him out to the barn, showing him the horses and cattle, talking to him about the ranch work as though he could understand every word. "You are going to raise him to be a cowboy," Helena teased one afternoon, watching them from the porch. "I am going to raise him to be whatever he wants to be," Harrison corrected, but his smile said he would not mind at all if his son followed in his footsteps. Summer came again, hot and bright, and with it a sense of contentment that pervaded every aspect of their lives. Helena often thought about that day 2 years ago when she had stepped off the stagecoach in Fort Benton, terrified and ill, carrying a secret that threatened to destroy her one chance at happiness. Now she stood in her garden, Henry playing on a blanket in the shade, and looked at the life she and Harrison had built. It was not always easy. There were hard days when her illness flared up, when the work seemed endless, when money was tight. But they faced everything together, partners in truth, bound by vows that had proved stronger than either of them had imagined. That evening, after Henry was asleep in his cradle, Harrison and Helena sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky. It had become their favorite time, these quiet moments together at the end of each day. "Do you ever regret it?" Helena asked suddenly. "Marrying a mail-order bride, taking on a woman with health problems and all the complications that brought." Harrison turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "Not for one moment. Helena, you have given me more than I ever dreamed of having. A home that is truly a home, a son I adore, and a love I did not think I would ever find. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Even the scary parts," she pressed. "The labor, the fear that I might not survive, even those," he said firmly, "because we came through them together and that made us stronger. Every challenge we have faced has only proven what I knew from the day you confessed your illness, that you are the woman I am meant to be with, in sickness and in health, in good times and bad. Helena leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling his arm come around her. In sickness and in health, she repeated softly. Those words saved my life, Harrison. When you said them that first day, you gave me hope when I had none. You showed me what it meant to be truly committed to another person. You showed me the same thing, he said. You came here knowing you were ill, knowing you might be a burden, but you came anyway because you wanted a chance at life. That took courage I cannot even imagine. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars Helena had gazed at in wonder on her first night at the ranch. So much had changed since then, and yet the fundamentals remained the same. This land, this sky, this man beside her. Henry made a small sound from inside the house, not quite crying, just a sleepy murmur. Harrison started to rise, but Helena put a hand on his arm. "Let me," she said. "I want to check on him." She went inside and stood beside the cradle, looking down at her sleeping son. His tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, and his fists were curled beside his face. Love welled up in her, so strong it almost hurt. She had not died young as she had feared. She had lived to fall in love, to marry, to bear a child. She had lived to build a life that mattered, surrounded by people who cared for her. The illness that had once defined her had become just one part of her story, not the ending. Helena returned to the porch and her husband, settling back into his embrace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments of fear and triumph. But they would face it all together, just as they had promised. In sickness and in health from this moment forward for the rest of their lives. The years that followed brought their share of trials and triumphs. The ranch prospered under Harrison's steady management and Helena's careful handling of their finances. They added on to the house, creating more space as their family grew. 2 years after Henry's birth, Helena gave birth to a daughter they named Hannah, a spirited little girl with her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. Helena's health remained stable, with only occasional flare-ups that left her tired for a few days. Dr. Harding's regular visits confirmed that her heart, while still showing signs of damage from the rheumatic fever, had not deteriorated further. In fact, he often commented that she seemed to be one of the lucky ones, whose bodies had found a way to adapt and compensate. "Love is powerful medicine," Martha said one afternoon when Helena confided her gratitude for her continued health. "And you have plenty of that." Indeed, the love between Helena and Harrison only deepened with time. They were partners in every sense, consulting each other on decisions large and small, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating each other's successes. The physical passion between them remained strong, tempered now with the comfort of long familiarity. Henry grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, learning about cattle and horses, about fixing fence and reading the weather. Hannah, younger and more reserved, had her mother's love of books and would sit for hours having Helena read to her. When Henry was 6 and Hannah 4, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was less fear, though Harrison still insisted on every precaution. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in the spring of 1885, she gave birth to another son whom they named Howard. The house rang with children's laughter now, with the sounds of play and occasional squabbles, with bedtime stories and morning lessons. Helena taught all 3 children to read and write, determined they would have the education she had received from her father. Harrison taught them about the land, about respecting nature and working hard. Fort Benton continued to grow and change around them. The railroad finally reached Montana territory in the 1880s, transforming the economy and making it easier to ship cattle to market. New neighbors arrived, building their own ranches and farms. The community that had welcomed Helena so warmly continued to be a source of support and friendship. On their 10th anniversary in 1888, Harrison surprised Helena by taking her back to Fort Benton for a rare night away from the ranch and children. The Brennans had agreed to watch Henry, Hannah, and Howard, and Harrison had booked a room at the finest hotel in town. They dressed in their best clothes and had dinner at a restaurant, something they had not done since before they were married. Over roast beef and potatoes, they reminisced about their early days together. "You remember how terrified I was?" Helena asked, smiling at the memory. "Standing in that general store, convinced you were going to send me back to St. Louis the moment I confessed my illness." "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever met," Harrison said. "To come all that way to risk rejection, all for a chance at a different life." "I got so much more than a different life," Helena said softly. "I got everything I never knew I needed. A home, a family, a love I did not think existed outside of novels." Harrison reached across the table and took her hand. "We have been blessed, both of us, but it is not just luck, Helena. We have worked for this. We have chosen each other every day in big ways and small. In sickness and in health," Helena said, and they both smiled at the words that had become their touchstone. After dinner, they walked along the river, watching the moonlight glitter on the water. The town was quiet at this late hour, and they had the night mostly to themselves. "I have something for you," Harrison said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small box and handed it to her. Helena opened it to find a delicate gold locket, engraved with their initials and wedding date. Inside were tiny photographs of their 3 children, so small she marveled at how they had been created. "Harrison, it is beautiful," she breathed. "When did you arrange this?" "I had it made in Helena the last time I went for supplies," he admitted. "I wanted you to have something to mark our 10 years together, something to show you how much these years have meant to me." Helena's eyes filled with tears. "You show me every day with your actions, your words, your love. But thank you. I will treasure this always." She fastened the locket around her neck, and Harrison pulled her close, kissing her there on the riverbank with the tenderness and passion of a man still deeply in love with his wife. They returned home the next day to chaos, as 3 excited children descended on them with stories of their adventures at the Brennan Ranch. Life resumed its busy rhythm, but Helena wore the locket every day, a reminder of how far they had come. More years passed, each one adding to the tapestry of their life together. The children grew, Henry becoming a capable ranch hand by age 12, Hannah developing a talent for painting the landscapes she loved, Howard showing an aptitude for numbers and figures that suggested he might one day manage the business side of the ranch. Helena's health remained good, though she never took it for granted. She had learned to listen to her body, to rest when needed, to not push beyond her limits. And Harrison never stopped being protective, even as the years softened some of the sharp edges of his earlier fear. In 1892, Montana achieved statehood, and the celebration in Fort Benton lasted 3 days. The Wells family attended the festivities, watching fireworks and listening to speeches about the bright future ahead. Henry, now 16, talked excitedly about the opportunities that statehood would bring. Hannah, 14, sketched the celebrating crowds, and Howard, at 7, mostly wanted to know if there would be more cake. That night, lying in bed with Harrison, Helena reflected on the changes she had witnessed. "We have seen so much," she said. "The territory becoming a state, the railroad changing everything, our children growing into remarkable people." "We have," Harrison agreed. "And through it all, the one constant has been us. This family, this love we have built." I used to think my life would be defined by my illness, Helena confessed. That I would either die young or survive as an invalid, dependent, and pitied. But you gave me a different story. You gave me the chance to be a wife, a mother, a partner. You gave me a full life. Harrison turned to face her, his hair now streaked with silver, lines deeper around his eyes, but those eyes still the same clear blue that had captivated her on her first day in Fort Benton. You gave me the same, Helena. Before you came, I was just existing, working and sleeping and working some more. You brought joy and purpose and love into my life. Our children, this home we have created, none of it would exist without you. They kissed, still finding pleasure in each other after all these years, and Helena felt profoundly grateful for the journey they had taken together. As the children reached adulthood, new challenges and joys emerged. Henry, at 20, announced his intention to marry a young woman from a neighboring ranch, Sarah Porter, the daughter of their friends. The wedding was a grand affair by Montana standards, with half the county in attendance, and Helena wept with happiness as she watched her firstborn pledge his life to another. Harrison gave the young couple a piece of land to start their own ranch, helping Henry build a house and establish his herd. Every man needs to build something of his own, he told his son. But you will always be part of this family, and we will always be here to help. Hannah, at 18, surprised them all by announcing she wanted to study art in Chicago. The idea of their daughter traveling so far was frightening, but Harrison and Helena supported her dreams. They made arrangements for her to stay with a respectable boarding house for young women and enrolled her in a program at the Art Institute. You gave me the courage to chase my dreams, Hannah told her mother the night before she left. By chasing yours and coming west to marry Papa. I know I can do this because you showed me how to be brave. Howard, at 13, was content to stay home and learn everything he could about ranching and business. He had his father's steady temperament and his mother's quick mind, and it was clear he would one day be a successful rancher in his own right. The house felt emptier with the children grown and gone, but Helena and Harrison found they enjoyed the quiet. They had more time for each other, for long talks and leisurely meals, for rides across their land just for the pleasure of it. On a crisp autumn afternoon in 1898, 20 years after their wedding, Helena stood on the porch watching Harrison work with a young horse in the corral. He was 53 now, his body still strong but bearing the marks of a lifetime of hard work. She was 42, her auburn hair streaked with gray, her face lined but still lovely. She thought about the terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 2 decades earlier, and she barely recognized her. That woman had been sick and afraid, convinced her life was ending before it had truly begun. She had taken a desperate chance on a stranger's advertisement, hoping for a few months of security. Instead, she had found a lifetime of love. Harrison saw her watching and waved, his smile bright and warm. Helena waved back, her hand instinctively touching the locket at her throat, still worn every day after 10 years. Life had not been perfect. There had been hard years, crop failures and cattle losses, harsh winters and scorching summers. There had been illnesses beyond her own, including a terrifying week when Hannah was 6 and contracted scarlet fever. There had been the usual trials of raising children and running a ranch, of navigating relationships and community obligations. But through it all, they had been together. Partners, lovers, best friends. The vows they had spoken in the small church in Fort Benton had proved to be more than just words. They had been a roadmap, a commitment that had carried them through every challenge in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse. Until death do us part. Helena watched her husband, this good man who had given her everything, and felt her heart swell with love. Her heart, that organ that had once threatened to fail her, beat strong and steady in her chest. Dr. Harding had told her on his last visit that he considered her a medical miracle, a woman whose heart had healed itself through some combination of good fortune and good care. But Helena knew the truth. Her heart had healed because Harrison Wells had given her a reason to live, had shown her what it meant to be truly loved and valued. He had taken her broken, frightened self and helped her become whole. As the sun set over the Montana landscape, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Helena made her way down to the corral. Harrison saw her coming and opened the gate, welcoming her into his arms. "What brings you out here, my love?" he asked, kissing the top of her head. "Just wanted to be near you," she said simply, leaning into his strength. "To remind myself how lucky I am." "I am the lucky one," he insisted, as he always did. "We are both lucky," Helena compromised, smiling up at him, "and grateful, and very, very blessed." They stood together in the fading light, two people who had taken a chance on each other 20 years earlier and built a life beyond their wildest dreams. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain as all futures are, but they would face it as they had faced everything else. Together, committed, bound by love and the promises they had made in a small church one spring day in 1878. In sickness and in health, they had vowed. And they had kept that vow, in ways large and small, every single day. It had not just been a beginning but a foundation, the bedrock on which they had built their marriage, their family, their life. As darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, they walked back to the house hand in hand, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. Because they had each other, and that was enough. That would always be enough. Their story had started with fear and desperation, with illness and uncertainty. But it had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of commitment, compassion, and choosing each other again and again, no matter what challenges arose. And on that autumn evening in Montana, with the wind whispering through the grass and the stars shining bright overhead, Helena and Harrison Wells were content. Their love had conquered illness, had thrived despite obstacles, had grown deeper with each passing year. In sickness and in health had started right then, on the day Helena confessed her secret and Harrison chose her anyway. And it continued still, a promise renewed each morning when they woke beside each other, each evening when they shared the day's events, each moment when they chose love over fear. It was a promise that would carry them through all their remaining years, a love that would endure until the very end. And beyond into the stories their children and grandchildren would tell. The story of a mail-order bride who took a chance, a cowboy who saw past illness to the woman beneath, and a love that proved stronger than any obstacle. Years continued to unfold in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Henry and Sarah had children of their own, making Helena and Harrison grandparents to 3 beautiful grandchildren who visited often, filling the house with laughter and energy. Hannah returned from Chicago with refined artistic skills and opened a small gallery in Helena, the state capital, where her paintings of Montana landscapes became sought after by collectors. She eventually married an architect, a thoughtful man who shared her passion for beauty, and they settled in Helena where Hannah could pursue her career. Howard took over more of the day-to-day operations of the Wells Ranch as Harrison aged, showing the same dedication and wisdom his father had demonstrated. At 21, he married a schoolteacher from Fort Benton named Grace, and they built a house on the ranch property, close enough to help but separate enough to establish their own household. Helena's health remained remarkably stable throughout her 40s and into her 50s. The fatigue that had once dominated her life became manageable, occasional rather than constant. She credited the Montana air, the good food, the active lifestyle, and most of all, the love and support of her family. Dr. Harding, who had grown old alongside them, called her his success story and wrote about her case in a medical journal, theorizing that proper care and reduced stress could indeed allow hearts damaged by rheumatic fever to compensate and heal. In 1903, 25 years after their wedding, Helena and Harrison celebrated their silver anniversary with a party that brought together friends and family from across Montana. The barn was decorated with lanterns and bunting, and long tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by their community. Musicians played, children danced, and stories were told long into the night. Henry stood and raised a glass to his parents. "To the strongest couple I know," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering. "Who taught us what real love looks like, what commitment means, and how to face life's challenges with courage and grace. To Ma and Pa, may you have many more years together." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Helena felt tears stream down her face as Harrison pulled her close. She looked around at the gathering, their 3 children and their spouses, their grandchildren running wild between the tables, their neighbors and friends who had become like family. This community, this life, this love, it was all so much more than she had ever imagined possible. As they danced together under the stars, Harrison whispered in her ear, "25 years ago, I was the luckiest man alive when you stepped off that stagecoach. Today, I am even luckier because I get to wake up beside you every morning." "We still have so much life ahead of us," Helena said, though they both knew time was growing shorter. They were in their late 50s now, older than many in this harsh land lived to be. "Then let us make every moment count," Harrison replied, and they swayed together to the music, surrounded by the life they had built. The early years of the new century brought changes both exciting and challenging. Automobiles began appearing on Montana roads, though Harrison declared he would stick with horses. Electricity came to some of the larger towns, though the ranch still relied on kerosene lamps and firewood. The world was modernizing rapidly, but the Wells Ranch remained a place where older values held sway. Hard work, honesty, community, and above all, love. In 1908, 30 years after their wedding, Helena was 52 and Harrison was 63. They had achieved something remarkable. A long marriage filled with genuine love and partnership, a successful ranch that would continue for generations, and children who had grown into capable, caring adults. One evening that fall, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sun set over their land. Duke had long since passed, and 2 generations of his descendants had come and gone, but the current dog, Duke the Fourth, dozed at their feet. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Helena asked. "When I confessed my illness and you said those words that changed everything." "I think about it often," Harrison admitted. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I even really knew you. If you had been too afraid to come west, if you had not found the courage to tell me the truth, if I had been a lesser man and turned you away." "But you did not," Helena said firmly. "You chose love over fear, acceptance over judgment. You said in sickness and in health starts right now, and you meant it." "I did mean it," Harrison said. "And I would mean it again, every day. You have given me the best 30 years of my life, Helena. Whatever time we have left, whether it is 30 days or 30 more years, I will cherish every moment." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him beside her. Her heart, that organ that had caused so much fear and uncertainty, beat steadily in her chest. She had outlived every prediction, exceeded every expectation. And she had done it by living fully, by embracing the life Harrison had offered her that spring day in 1878. The years that followed were gentle ones. Helena and Harrison settled into a comfortable old age, with Howard running the ranch and Grace managing the household. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a growing family, with more grandchildren being born, and eventually great-grandchildren as Henry's children married and started families of their own. They celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1918, a milestone that felt almost miraculous given Helena's early prognosis. Dr. Harding had passed away 2 years earlier, but his successor, a young doctor who had heard the story of Helena's remarkable recovery, came to examine her and declared her a medical wonder. "Your heart shows the damage from the rheumatic fever," he told her, "but it has adapted remarkably. Whatever you have been doing, Mrs. Wells, it has worked." "I have been living," Helena said simply, "and loving and being loved. That is the best medicine anyone could ask for." In their later years, when Helena was in her 60s and Harrison in his 70s, they spent long hours sitting together, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. They read together, played cards, received visits from their extensive family. The ranch continued to prosper under Howard's management, and they wanted for nothing. Hannah's art had made her famous throughout the West, and several of her paintings hung in the territorial now state capitol building. Henry had expanded his own ranch and was one of the most respected cattlemen in Montana. Howard and Grace had given them 6 grandchildren, all of whom spent their summers learning ranch work from Grandpa Harrison and listening to stories from Grandma Helena. As Helena approached 70, she sometimes felt the weight of her years. The fatigue that had never fully left her was more pronounced now, and she tired more easily. But her mind remained sharp, her spirit strong, and her love for Harrison as fierce as ever. One spring morning in 1923, 45 years after their wedding, Helena woke to find sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and Harrison still sleeping beside her. She studied his face, so familiar yet always dear, marked now with the deep lines of age and work and laughter. His hair was completely white, his hands gnarled with arthritis, but to her he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him waiting for her in Fort Benton. She thought about the journey they had traveled together, from strangers brought together by necessity and hope, to partners and lovers, to the beloved grandparents and great-grandparents they had become. They had seen the frontier transform into a modern state, had watched their children grow and flourish, had built something lasting and meaningful, and they had done it all together, bound by vows they had spoken in their youth and honored through every day of their lives, in sickness and in health. For better or worse, until death do us part, Helena knew their time was growing shorter. Both of them felt the approach of the end, though neither spoke of it often. But there was no fear in this knowing, only a sense of completion, of a life fully lived and well loved. Harrison's eyes opened, and he smiled when he saw her watching him. "Good morning, my love." "Good morning," she replied, reaching for his hand. Their fingers intertwined as they had thousands of times before, a simple gesture that carried the weight of 4.5 decades of love. They rose and dressed, moving slowly with the stiffness of age, and made their way to the kitchen where Grace had already prepared breakfast. The house was quiet, peaceful, filled with the morning light that made everything seem golden and new. After breakfast, they walked together through the ranch, moving slowly but steadily. Harrison pointed out improvements Howard had made, new fencing and a recently expanded barn. They stopped by the creek where wildflowers bloomed, painting the bank in shades of purple and yellow. "Remember when we first came here?" Helena asked. "And you showed me all this, and I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," Harrison replied. "Standing there in your travel-worn dress, trying so hard to be brave despite your fear. I fell in love with you in that moment, I think. I just did not know it yet. I fell in love with you when you knelt beside my chair and promised to face everything together," Helena said. "When you said in sickness and in health starts right now. That was the moment I knew I had found something precious." They stood by the creek, holding hands, two old people who had loved well and been loved in return. The morning sun warmed them, and the sound of the water flowing over stones filled the air with music. "No regrets?" Harrison asked, as he had asked many times over the years. "Not a single one," Helena replied, as she always did. "You gave me a life beyond my dreams, Harrison. You gave me everything. You gave me the same," he said softly, "and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They returned to the house as noon approached, and Helena felt the familiar fatigue settling into her bones. She rested while Harrison sat beside her, reading aloud from a book of poetry they both loved. His voice was rough with age but still warm, still the voice that had promised to love her in sickness and health all those years ago. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, Helena realized something profound. She was happy. Despite the illness that had haunted her youth, despite all the challenges and fears, she had lived a full and joyful life. She had been a wife and mother, had raised children and seen them flourish, had been part of a community, had known love in its deepest and truest form. The illness that she had thought would define her life had become merely one thread in a much larger tapestry. Harrison's words, spoken on that first day, had not just been a promise, they had been a prophecy. In sickness and in health, they had built a life together, and it had been a beautiful life. Years continued to pass gently. Helena and Harrison celebrated their 50th anniversary in 1928, surrounded by an enormous gathering of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. It was a golden milestone, rare and precious, and the entire county seemed to turn out to honor the couple who had become something of a legend. 50 years, the new reverend at the Fort Benton church said during the celebration. 50 years of love, commitment, and partnership. Harrison and Helena Wells are a testament to what marriage can be when two people truly honor their vows. In their final years together, Helena and Harrison spent most of their time in quiet contentment. They sat on their porch and watched the world go by, receiving visitors and telling stories to the youngest generation. Helena's health remained surprisingly good into her mid-70s, though both she and Harrison were slowing down. On a warm summer evening in 1930, Helena sat beside Harrison on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in glorious colors. She was 74 now, and Harrison was 85, remarkable ages for their generation. They had outlived most of their contemporaries, but they had each other. "I have been thinking," Helena said softly, "about that woman who stepped off the stagecoach 52 years ago. So young and frightened, convinced she was dying. If I could go back and tell her what waited ahead, what would I say?" Harrison considered the question. "What would you tell her?" "I would tell her to be brave, to confess her secret and trust the man waiting for her. I would tell her that the next 50 years would be hard sometimes but so worth it. I would tell her that she would know real love, that she would be a mother and grandmother, that she would have a life filled with purpose and joy." Helena paused, tears in her eyes. "But most of all, I would tell her that in sickness and in health were not just empty words. They were a promise that would carry her through everything." Harrison pulled her close, and they sat together as the stars emerged, the same stars that had watched over them through 5 decades of marriage. Their love had not faded with time but had deepened, becoming something rich and complex and utterly irreplaceable. "Thank you," Helena whispered into the gathering darkness, "for choosing me, for loving me, for giving me this life." "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy," Harrison replied, "for being brave enough to come west, for trusting me with your truth, for building this life with me. You have been my greatest blessing, Helena, every single day." They remained on the porch long into the evening, two old souls who had found each other against all odds and created something beautiful. The mail-order bride and the cowboy, bound together by vows spoken in youth, and honored through every day of a long, love-filled life. In sickness and in health they had vowed, and they had meant it. Through illness and wellness, through hard times and good, through every challenge and joy, they had chosen each other. And that choice, made and remade every single day, had been the foundation of a love that would endure not just until death parted them, but beyond, in the stories told by their descendants, in the legacy of commitment and devotion they left behind. As the stars wheeled overhead and the Montana night wrapped around them, Helena and Harrison sat in perfect contentment, grateful for every moment, every year, every breath they had shared. Their story had begun with uncertainty and fear, but it had become a testament to the power of love, the strength of commitment, and the beauty of a promise kept. "In sickness and in health starts right now," Harrison had said 52 years earlier, and he had been right. It had started in that moment and continued through every day since, a promise that had transformed two lonely people into a family, a house into a home, and a desperate gamble into the greatest love story of their lives.